Yes, yes, and yes. The United States has been out to weaken Russia or even to dismember Russia, as many in Washington talk about it, or to decolonize Russia, as some in Washington talk about it, for more than 30 years. It's important to understand, and it's fitting, of course, because Germany plays a big role in this story, that the modern story starts in 1990 with German reunification. That effectively was the end of World War II because there had been no treaty that ended World War II. That was because also there was no arrangement for mutual security in Europe. In 1990, of course, under Chancellor Kohl, Germany wanted to reunify. It wanted to reunify quickly. And in that context, it had a peacemaker in the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. And to bring about German reunification, the United States and Germany made an absolutely clear, solemn, and repeated promise. We have it on tape. We have it in endless documents. And that is that not only would the West not take advantage of the Soviet Union in the context of German reunification, but specifically, NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. That's the quotation of Secretary of State James Baker III, for example, on February 9th, 1990. This is not ambiguous. It's not even close. It's explicit. I happen to be an economic advisor for President Gorbachev. I think he was the greatest statesman of modern times. He was a peacemaker. He wanted German reunification. I know because I was an advisor to the Polish government, he facilitated the entry into the government in 1989 of the non-communist Solidarność opposition. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I was part of the process. But the idea was peace in Europe. Mm-hmm. Now, immediately after that, the United States leaders said, this isn't about peace. This is about U.S. hegemony. This is about the U.S. being the sole superpower. Now we run the world. This was Cheney and Wolfowitz in the Department of Defense in 1992. Again, no doubt, it's all in documentary record. The idea was the Soviet Union is now gone. Now we, the United States, run the show. A lot of obnoxious, arrogant people took power in the United States, and their idea for the next 33 years, because it's until today, is this is now the U.S.-led world. Well, most of the world doesn't want to be led by the United States. Most of the world would like to cooperate with the United States, but not to be pulled around on a leash by the United States. And in particular, Russia and China do not want to be led by the United States. They would like to have peaceful cooperation. Mm-hmm. Not in the American mentality. The American mentality is, we won, you lost, now we decide everything. And in 1994, the basic decision was made. 1994, 31 years ago, by Bill Clinton, of course, by the U.S. security apparatus. Clinton is, the president. He comes and goes, but the security apparatus, I mean, the Pentagon, the CIA, and others, they run long-term U.S. foreign policy. And they said, okay, now NATO enlarges. Many diplomats said, well, wait a minute, we said no NATO enlargement. No, come on, we won. This is our prerogative. And Bill Clinton signed off on NATO enlargement. And not just on NATO enlargement in 1994. What the historians are showing in the documentary record is already 30 years ago, it was all the way to Ukraine, all the way to Georgia. I would like people to look at a map. NATO's going to be in the Caucasus, and this is somehow consistent with Russian security? Are we crazy? Donald Trump would not tolerate a Chinese or Russian military base thousands of miles from the U.S. border. Here we're supposed to be right at the Russian border. Now, the Europeans understood all of this. Not a great idea. Pretty dangerous. Keep calm. Don't provoke. But you know, the United States doesn't listen to Europe. I'm sorry to give away the secret, but the United States treats the European leaders like, you know, we do what we want, you follow, you abide by our dictates, and that's it. And of course, a big showdown came in 2008. And, former Chancellor Angela Merkel has written about this in her memoirs, how she opposed in 2008 George W. Bush Jr.'s demand that NATO commit to a date and a roadmap for Ukraine and Georgia to join. And she knew this was a bad idea, and other European leaders knew that it was a bad idea. Now, it's fascinating what happened. What happened was the United States put its foot down. Okay, Chancellor Merkel said, we're not going to sign a specific date. But what came out of the Bucharest summit in 2008? Ukraine and Georgia will be members of NATO. And she signed that. She agreed to that. So did the other European leaders. One of them called me afterwards and said, what is your president doing? This is against the promises that he made to Europe. We were told U.S. wasn't going to press this. The U.S. pressed it. The European leaders fell into line. And that was, to my mind, the last moment of European diplomacy until today. Because basically, from then until today, the U.S. has been calling the shots. Now, all of this has led to war because Russia has said, without question, no, you will not have your missile systems, you will not have your military bases on our border. A few minutes missile time from Moscow. No, you will not do it. And by the way, Donald Trump, he thinks we need to own Canada for U.S. security. He thinks we need to own Greenland for U.S. security. He thinks we need to own Panama for U.S. security. Well, all President Putin is saying is don't put your military bases and your missiles on our border. If we were grown-ups, we'd say, yeah, that's a point. We should avoid World War III. We should avoid that provocation. I know many European leaders privately are grown-ups, but publicly they're children. They just fall into line with what the United States says. And if the United States says, this war has nothing to do with NATO enlargement, then the European leaders say, this war has nothing to do with NATO enlargement. And the game is played where it obviously does. And I think just to conclude on this basic point, it's not just the NATO enlargement, it's the context in which this is happening. In 2002, the United States broke the equilibrium of nuclear arms control by unilaterally abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty. I think people really need to understand that this was a massively destabilizing action. And if you go back then until now, how many times have Russian leaders said, this is destabilizing. This gives you a provocation for a first strike, a decapitation strike. We don't want these missile systems. We don't want Aegis missile systems in Poland. We don't want Aegis missile systems in Romania. We certainly don't want Aegis missile systems in Ukraine. In 2019, the United States unilaterally walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Agreement, saying, yes, we'll put intermediate nuclear missiles where we want. The U.S. walked out of the Open Skies Agreement. Basically, the United States, and I think it is so profoundly reckless, broke the nuclear arms framework unilaterally. And it's in that context that this NATO enlargement is especially provocative because it's NATO enlargement without nuclear arms control. I could mention 100 other kinds of provocations. Bombing Belgrade for 78 straight days in 1999, good idea, not a very good idea. Breaking Serbia in two and declaring that Kosovo is an independent state, and then putting the largest NATO military base in Kosovo, Bondesteel, the largest base in southeastern Europe after breaking the country in two with 78 days of bombing. Is that building trust? Is that grown-up behavior? Or is that a kind of thuggery, which it in fact is? Going to war all over the Middle East, in Iraq on completely phony pretenses, destabilizing Syria starting in 2011 in a CIA operation, Timber Sycamore, using NATO to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, and conspiring in the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014. Is it any wonder that we're at war right now? And then why did the mainstream media in the United States and in Europe say, oh, 2022 completely unprovoked? Because they take their script from the US security state, as do the European leaders, which is very sad because Europe knows a lot more about this than the United States does. The US side, I know it. I know these people. I know them personally. I deal with them all my life. They're arrogant. They're stupid. They don't even know basic geography. They don't know what they're doing. They just think that they're in control. If European leaders said, really, this is not a good idea. This is provocative. This is destabilizing. Let's make peace. Let's listen to Russia, not just bulldoze the situation. Europe would be more secure, it would be more stable, it would be at peace, it would not be in this absurd, reckless campaign right now of Rutte and others, 5% of GDP in military spending. Are you kidding? How about a day of no-cost talking to Russia rather than 5% of GDP? By the way, to buy U.S. arms that aren't even working on the battlefield in Ukraine. The whole thing is rather frustrating, is what it is.